Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. I'm your host, Dave Vance. Our guest tonight is Representative Monty Fritts. But first, if you have an announcement from a conservative organization that you would like announced on this show, please send the information to tennesseeinformer.tv@gmail.com the Friday before the show. The Stewart County GOP will hold its monthly meeting Thursday at the Stewart County Visitor Center at 6:30 p.m. If you want our state to step up and push back on our overreaching, often unconstitutional federal government, visit tncss.weebly.com and learn more about the legislation we hope to get passed this session that creates multiple processes for nullifying unconstitutional federal actions. Before we get to our guests, let's look again at our state constitution. I like to start with a focus on the Declaration of Rights. I know I've used these slides for the last couple of weeks, but I think it's worthwhile to reinforce these points, especially while our legislature is in session. Article 1, Declaration of Rights, Section 1. All power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness. For the advancement of those ends, they have at all times an unalienable and indefeasible right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such manner as they may think proper. Section 2. The government being instituted for the common benefit, the doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression is absurd, slavish, and destructive of the good and happiness of mankind. Article 11, Miscellaneous Provisions, Section 16. The Declaration of Rights, hereto prefixed declared to be part of the Constitution of the state, and shall never be violated on any pretense whatever. And to guard against transgression of the high powers we have delegated, we declare that everything in the Bill of Rights contained is accepted out of the general powers of the government and shall forever remain inviolate. Now, I've just read section 1 and 2. You have to go to read the whole Article 1 of the Tennessee Constitution, and it lays out all of our rights that are supposed to be off limits from the government. We're talking about off limits from the state government as well as the federal government, for that matter. Time for a word about what's going on in our legislature. Now, I can't adequately cover all the pending legislation, good or bad, in an hour or even 2 hours. Just understand we are being attacked on every front. You know, we have people in our state that are pushing Agenda 2030. It's all we can do to get our state to allow us to fully exercise our Second Amendment rights. We just got a lot of things going on. It was good to know that there was a bill that earlier today that was going to be put forth. It's supposed to be a nullification bill, but it really falls short from the bill that we're supporting. And so there was a lot of pushback on that today, and I know the bill got rolled, and that's, of course, I'm talking about 2058 by Senator Lowe. That bill did get rolled, and we'll know more about that later. So I was glad to see people standing up for that issue, and I hope that we can get more support as we go along for House Bill 2795 by Representative Halsey and Senate Bill 2775 by Senator Bowling when the time comes. As far as other additional recommendations for things that are going on, for anything having to do with nullification legislation, I recommend tncss.weebly.com. Also sign up for the Substack letter. For all Second Amendment related bills, I recommend tennesseefirearms.com. For legislation covering a variety of topics, I would recommend Tennessee Eagle Forum and tennesseestands.org. Before we get to our state representative, Monty Fritts, and this is unrelated to anything we're talking about tonight per se, but back to the issue of nullification and back to, with everything going on in our country, you know, the federal government, in our state, we do have some good representatives. We do have some good senators. We don't have near enough. We do have one of the good guys on with us tonight, and there are several others. We need more. But the situation we're in, and this is kind of an analogy of how I see our situation. If you remember the scene from Private Ryan, where the two American soldiers are in the room with the big Nazi, and one soldier is fighting the Nazi, and the Nazi is on top of him, and he's slowly driving that knife into that American soldier. While the other soldier, the other American soldier, is just sitting there crying, doing nothing to help. Well, I see that Nazi soldier as our federal government, and I see us I see the soldier on the bottom getting the knife stuck through his heart. I see that as our country. I see that as our citizens, our Constitution, our rights, our freedoms, our prosperity, and the future of our children. And the federal government is driving a knife right through the heart of it. And that soldier on the side, not doing anything, but crying, is way too often, in my opinion, that is overall our state as a whole. In a lot of other states, most other states. That's the way it appears to me. And if I could put a caption on that, it seems to me that way too often our state seems to be saying, I'd like to help you, but they'll take our federal funding if I do. Or I'd like to help you, but the federal government is supreme in anything it wants to do. And then the one that I really hate to hear, I'd like to help you, but the Supreme Court says X, Y, or Z. So that's an analogy. That's how I kind of see where we're at in our country. And I was glad to see our state, I was glad to see them step up on the issue on the border down in Texas. Okay, stand with Texas. That's good. It's a start. I think we have to stand up for a lot more things, and I think we have to be more proactive. So that's one of the reasons I support nullification legislation. So that's just something for you to consider. Consider or disregard, garbage in, garbage out, however you see it. I just wanted to share that with you. Now a little bit about our guest, Representative Monty Fritts, District 32, Loudoun and parts of Roane County. Married, 2 children, 3 grandchildren. He's a combat veteran, a realtor, nuclear manufacturing consultant. He's a Christian, he's a Baptist. Multiple discipline in chemistry and business from Liberty University, an MA in theological studies from Liberty University, Master of Business Administration, University of Tennessee, Executive Program for Leading Operational Excellence, MIT. Thanks for agreeing to come on the show. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good, sir. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you again, and I hope to have you in the future. I know you're one of the fighting freshmen up there. We've got some good freshmen up there in this legislature now.
I would agree. Thank you. I consider it an honor to be counted amongst people like Jody Barrett, Kip Capley, just really Gino Bulso. I got a chance to talk to Gino earlier today, and so when you hear me speak and you hear Gino speak, you might not think we have a whole lot in common, but the truth is that dumb old country boys like me think a whole lot about freedom and prosperity that you mentioned, like Gino does. In the history of this world, for the masses, for the general public, to have prosperity widespread, it has only followed liberty, and our country has been the example of that. And there's a scripture verse that says, "Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty." And so you didn't ask me to come preach tonight, but I'm going to preach just a little bit on that. That there's an inverse truth to that. I think that is the absolute truth. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. But you have to consider the other side of that coin, where there is there's tyranny and oppression and people's rights being violated. That spirit is not from the Lord Jesus Christ. That is an evil spirit. And I'll get off the preaching in just a minute, Dave. But I'm convinced. I'm convinced that God's nature has not changed. His word says that. He says He's the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. And so we oftentimes try to draw analogies based on our relativity toward Him, and base it on what we want to shape God to be. And the fact of the matter is, He is righteous in all things. And He expects us, especially those of us that He's greatly blessed, we Americans, we Tennesseans, to remain faithful. And we've allowed lots of those things to waver. And we have been that foxhole fighter, or that person with their head in the sand many times, and I think allowed some things to take root in the United States and in our state that have perhaps drawn the curse of God rather than His blessing. And last thing I'll say on that, if you look at what our founding fathers, those men that God assembled, I think, together, I'm not at all drawing an analogy that we're the new Israel or anything like that, not at all. But what I am saying is that God is provident in all things, and He assembled a group of men together to bring this nation in place so that liberty could reign, and we the people. So when you look in Jeremiah and some of the old stories in the Bible and Chronicles and Kings, and you see wicked king, wicked king, wicked king, good king, wicked king, good king Hezekiah, you see that God blessed those good kings. Well, we don't have a king. What God gave us was not a man or a woman, not an office, not a governor, certainly not a state representative, not a president. He gave us a Constitution. And so I am absolutely convinced that, Romans 13 is often used from pulpits around the country to suggest that we must just obey whatever the evil king says. Well, that is not what Scripture is telling us. And we are accountable first to Almighty God, those of us that are believers. And it is incumbent upon us to stand and do the right thing, the moral thing, and to defend that Constitution. Because I think this is where many theologians are missing it today. And, again, country boy from Rockwood, offering an argument on this, but I'll stand by it scripturally and constitutionally, that the accountability on we the people, not only do we get to exercise that freedom and liberty that again, God allowed to take place here on the continent, but we exercise the full responsibility for it. It's not going to be the wicked king alone who's held accountable for the sins of this nation. It's going to be we that know better. So it's a very solemn thing. Again, I know that's a bit preachy, but I'm convinced that we need to come to that realization and humbly find ourselves, repentant and seeking to do what is good and righteous.
Well, I agree 100%. For our country to have a chance, it's going to take divine intervention, which takes prayer and repentance, and it's going to take state intervention, in my opinion, to set this ship right, if it can be set right.
And we're trying to do that in a couple areas. I would first offer that I appreciate the resume stuff that you showed, and we did that last time we interviewed, and I'm very humbled and honored by that. But someone like me only gets an opportunity to do some things that I've gotten to do in America. And I often tell people I didn't realize I had won the lottery when I was born in Rockwood, Tennessee. But I'm absolutely convinced, not the lottery that lures people into spending lots of money on something they're not going to win, probably, but right. That lottery of freedom and liberty and just being a Tennessean. So I take that very seriously. It's a very emotional thing for me, but it is part of who I am. And if it kind of rubs people the wrong way, that'll be okay. I hope they'll forgive me. I'm good at being me and not so good at being somebody else.
Well, I think you're doing fine, and I think we need more like you up there. One of the things that I definitely want to talk about, I mentioned the border, and I am glad to see our state step up and stand with Texas on that. And you've got some legislation in reference to that. So if we could start there with House Bill 2190, which is a caption bill, but you can kind of fill in the blanks for us, if you would.
Yes, sir. And it's actually more than a caption now. 2190 is. I actually got it through committee last week. And 2190 very basically follows what Article 3, Section 5 of the Tennessee Constitution declares, and that is that in a case of rebellion or invasion, the General Assembly has to declare by law that we're going to send, and I'll use the word forces, to defend against that. So that's what this bill's about. It's really about enabling Governor Lee to do, send forces to Texas in support of what is an invasion. I come to this because Governor Abbott in Texas, maybe 2 months ago now, had declared that by the rights of the Texas Constitution, they must, not just had a right to, but they must defend that border and against an invasion. And as someone who's traveled to the border and seen what was taking place in McAllen, Texas, it is an invasion. And so this bill will authorize, if we get it through committees and everything into the floor, it'll authorize the governor to send up to a brigade-sized force to Texas. Now, you may ask, well, Monty, do you want to send 3,000, 4,000 people to Texas? The intent of using brigade size was not at all to try to dictate how many folks that Governor Lee sends, but it does give us an approximation if for a cost. And the bill is laid out for a time period and has some conditions in it so that if we send folks and they have to be maintained there for longer than a year, there's some provisions so that the General Assembly must reengage. Part of it, I think, part of what is wrong in our nation today, and part of the reason we're so in debt, and I have proudly served in the Army in Iraq, but we have since World War II entered into these non-declared wars. Right. We found ourselves farther and farther away from it, from what the Constitution states. And even with the War Powers Act of 1973, I think it was, we've even departed from that. And we've become warmongers, many of our political leaders are. And we want to send our treasure and much more importantly, our sons and daughters off to die in these hygienically challenged parts of the world. And we've got to get back to that. In the state of Tennessee as well, the people have a voice. And we in the House and the Senate are that voice. And our Constitution states clearly that, we should take these actions. So I am happy to carry that. I hate that we're in a condition where we need to, that the federal government has failed so miserably, and some might even argue intentionally at the southern border, that it's necessary to do things like that, but it is necessary. We have two other bills I'll quickly touch on. We have a bill that you will see within the next couple of weeks in committee that increases the penalty for illegal aliens in the state of Tennessee who have committed a violent crime as defined by code currently, or possession of a deadly weapon on commission of that violent crime, to enhance the sentence up to life with no parole. And I think we have to establish deterrence, Dave.
Absolutely.
And that's one of our ways to do that. That bill does a couple other things. It's kind of in caption form now. I'm working the final the notes on it to get it ready to use, and we'll get that out in a couple of weeks. We have another bill that is in full caption form right now, but it will task the Department of Safety, the Tennessee Homeland Security, in issuing some reports, and we're going to do that by requiring local law enforcement agencies to report known and suspected interface with illegal aliens into Homeland Security. And then Homeland Security will develop some reports from that, making sure the General Assembly is informed and making sure that local law enforcement is informed. Today, if you ask your local law enforcement folks, your sheriffs or your police chiefs, and you ask them how many illegal aliens we have in the state, they're going to tell you they don't know. And they're going to tell you that because the federal government will not share those numbers. And one more thought on this, Dave, and I'll stop. I'll come up for air and let you talk. But the a good friend of mine is a police chief in our area, a longtime friend of mine, and he offered this analogy. He said, we've relied on the federal government to do this, and rightfully so. That controlling the border is the federal government's responsibility. But he said not only are they not doing their job now, they're actually, what they're doing is deleterious to the freedom and security and safety of every American living Tennessean. And we've reached the point where we are going to have to assert our authority to manage some of those things too. And so we're trying to do that. I'm sure it'll meet with much criticism and complaints, and but it is the right thing to do. And so we're going to push it.
So let me ask you this: as far as you said, they're going to track the number of illegal alien encounters. Okay, but what are we doing when we encounter these illegal aliens? Are we going to do anything if they're not breaking any other law, or are we only going to do something if they're breaking the law in addition to being here illegally?
Well, it's the way I've got it written now is for known and suspected interfaces. So that doesn't necessarily mean arrest, and it doesn't necessarily mean probable cause for arrest. But it is intended to be a first step in accounting, in developing some state level accountability. And I've been happy with the meetings we've had. We're working with the Department of Safety and getting their input on what's achievable and what works. I've talked to all but one, I think, of my law enforcement leads about this type of approach. And as soon as that language is finished, my sheriffs and chiefs will be the first one to see it, because it's important, I think, to each one of them. And I want to do something that is both executable and effective.
Okay, so I'm still just a little bit confused. Once we count them, okay, or once we've identified, what are we doing with that information?
Well, I think part of it is we have to share that information. It becomes an intelligence gathering thing. I would offer that we're at war today, and I know that's going to make people's head explode.
Say that again now.
We're at war with in our
absolutely.
We are under an invasion.
Right, a Fed-led invasion. This is a Fed-led invasion.
So lots of those people are, moms and dads and kids that want to come for a better life, and I get that. They're still criminals when they come across that border illegally.
Right.
And we shouldn't be giving them credit cards, and we shouldn't be putting them up in places to live, and we shouldn't be deciding to school the children for the rest of their lives, to be honest with you. As harsh as that may sound, we shouldn't be doing those things.
No.
What started as a Christian nation, we have to be careful not to be unnecessarily rigorous on the sojourner, right? But sending them back, is not unnecessarily rigorous. What we're doing today is definitely unnecessarily rigorous
on us,
the community and the citizens of the United States of America. So, we're still working on what the reports are going to look like and how we're going to do that, the periodicity and all. And so, I don't want to speculate too far on where we're going to come with that, but just know we are working on it. I think it's the right thing to do. I think it becomes a bit of a intelligence gathering, data to equip actions.
Okay. Well, I hope it involves at least sending them to blue states or dropping them off at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue at a minimum, since we, not necessarily going to send them back to the border. I'd love to be able to fly them all back to their country or whatever, but if we're going to track the numbers, I just hope we can do something to diminish the number once we identify who and where they are.
Yeah, that's I will tell you, I have a thought on all that. I think there's some politics in sending folks to New York City and Chicago and all that. I'm convinced that this invasion at the southern border is designed to have three basic effects on us. First, it is to impact the economics of the nation, and we can't sustain what's happening now.
Right.
We can't provide medical care and education and room and board. We just can't do that. And I think that's certainly, it's planned. I think there's an electoral threat in it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
In some of these crazy blue states where they want to have aliens vote or non-citizens vote, that's the depth of stupidity to me. But that's part of it. And the other part, it's not just voting. So if you send large numbers of people, if you'll remember while President Trump was in office, the Supreme Court had ruled, I think it was the Supreme Court ruling, federal courts ruled anyways, I don't want to misspeak there, that you couldn't just count citizens, you had to count everybody. And that was a very deliberate thing. Mm-hmm. So if we do that now, if you count everybody, and we've had 6 or 7 million people, or 10 million, whatever the true number is. I don't think we know that completely. But if you have those folks come in and you put them all in Chicago and New York City, it hasn't really solved the problem, because their congressional districts are going to grow out of that. And it's going to be that type of electoral nightmare. And then the third E that I would offer you, it's an existential threat to the United States of America.
Right. And first... Go ahead.
I have no doubt that some of these people that have come across that border are enemies of the United States and the people of the United States. And they've come here with ill intent and are staged to do such. Yep. And I know that sounds harsh and ugly and conspiracy related, but I would offer to you it's not. It's a realist. It's sad. Yep. I have to admit that, but I think it's a sad realist position.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. And in fact, I think every military age male that crosses the border should be shot. Just straight up, cut and dried. Every military age illegal that crosses our border should be shot. We can't wait on the federal government to protect us. We can't try to figure it out after they get into Tennessee. We know the feds are not here to protect us. They are leading this invasion. I don't know what we can do besides that. I know that won't happen, but in my opinion, the threat is at least as dire as you describe it. And so if you're a military age male, you shouldn't be crossing our border.
I'll dissent with you a little bit on that. Being a soldier, there are rules of engagement, and certainly I think that might not be the right approach to take.
Well, we could give a warning shot.
But the thing is to control that border. That's the solution. Control the border, shut it down.
Yeah.
That is the solution to it. And many of these people are coming just because that they know they're going to come in, get to come in, and they're going to be given cards and money and all those kinds of things.
Well, but if our federal government was not facilitating this and they were controlling the border, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
I agree with
and
you.
we wouldn't be under the threat that we're under. And so
I just think you got to be careful with the ought to be shot, because it might influence things we don't necessarily want to influence. I just issue that.
Now, I do have a question. So you've got a bill and you're working with the state DHS and trying to get a handle on who's here, all the illegals that are here. And of course, we don't know exactly yet what we're going to do once we figure that out. At the same time, just 2 years ago, our state passed a law that gives professional licenses to illegal aliens. So as much as our governor and our AG sign all these letters and make complaints to the federal government, at the same time, we're doing things to incentivize and to reward people who have already come here illegally. So it seems to me like we could do things in Tennessee, like repeal that law, and we should be the most unfriendly state in the nation to illegal aliens. But it seems to me like the Chamber of Commerce crowd is just too happy with the cheap labor to actually do that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think certainly I wasn't here for that. I wouldn't have voted.
Right.
But and it's easy to speculate the whys. And I'm not offering any excuse, Dave. I mean,
right, you weren't here. I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying why we're going through all of this, and we're trying to get a handle on it. Other people in our government, the governor and others, know we passed this type of legislation. And just a few years ago, well before you were in, they gave $7.2 million to Catholic charities, whose main focus is bringing in refugees, not the same as illegals, I got it, but they also facilitate the relocation of illegals. So it seems to me like our state could do some things on its own to make our state maybe a little less of a desired destination for the illegals.
And it's some of the things I'm trying to do now. And what I was going to say is I'm not trying to offer an excuse for how folks voted on that then. But I will say this: I think there's much more of a realization today. Well, 2 years ago, I was saying, hey, we got to do something about this illegal alien thing. And it's not that I'm prescient. I don't have any crystal ball or anything like that. But sometimes your life experience leads you to just know things when you see what's happening and be really concerned about them. And I think some of these folks probably hadn't had some of that type of experience to see what's coming. And again, this isn't an excuse. It's not a justification. It's just the reality of it. Most people have a hard time, even today, realizing that our nation's under an invasion. And even when they say it, because it's become a little more palatable to say that today, it still makes them really uncomfortable to say it. Heck, it makes me uncomfortable to say it. I don't like what's happening. But we can't ignore the problem. Right. We're going to have to address the problem. And those are human beings. They are human beings. And so we do have that responsibility for the sojourner. That's the scriptural part of it, is to not mistreat people. But mistreating them is not sending them back where they come from. I mean, that's something we should be doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Back to 2190 for a minute. Now, it sounds to me like you're basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, trying to make sure that the government does this, the governor does these deployments to Texas in accordance with our state constitution. And along with that, my question is, are there limits on when they're deployed on what they can do, the type of activities that they can be involved in? Or is that not part of the bill?
To your first question, this bill is really to enable the governor to do what he needs to, make good decisions about helping the state of Texas, and have the backing of the General Assembly in doing so, because constitutionally he needs that in this case. And so it's in support. While I certainly don't agree with anybody on everything, other than maybe Bud Halsey, I might agree with him on this. But anyways, John Reagan, maybe. But I'm not going to agree with most people on everything, and we shouldn't. If we're all, it's kind of like what George Patton said: if we're all thinking the same thing, somebody's not thinking. And so it's good to have dissenting opinions on things, but just to equip the decision making, because that is a weighty thing. It's a weighty thing to write this bill.
Right.
Because in writing this bill, and to your second question, there are no restrictions on what they can and can't do. I'll leave that up to the military department and to the government. That's their role. Constitutionally, you won't find anything that says that the General Assembly outlines those tasks, right?
Right.
There's a lot of weight on just writing that you're saying it, because it is a harm's way. It may not be a combat somewhere, but it is a harm's way. That if you speak with the folks in McAllen, Texas, they'll tell you that the border is lawless.
Yep.
Tell you that it's murderous. They'll tell you that it's that the drugs there's far more money in getting drugs across the border than legal traffic. And then they'll tell you, folks I met with, that there's even more money in human trafficking than what there is in the drugs. And so, we had 650,000 men that, for many reasons, went to war in 1860s, right?
Right.
And one of those big reasons was that, without debate, it was one of the big reasons was slavery. And lots of men have given their lives. Lots of farms were burned down and crops destroyed and all the horrible things that happen in war. And one of the results of that was, the liberation of black folks in America from being owned. And it took a while to get that right. But today, we are trafficking human beings in the United States again, and I think some people it seems like they're comfortable with it because they're maybe from somewhere else, or they perceive this to be something happening somewhere else. Yep. I'll tell you, there's a lot of my colleagues here that are fully aware that the humans that are being trafficked in Tennessee and across this country, some of them are Americans. But some of them are human beings from other countries that have been taken advantage of and forced to swim across that Rio Grande at threat of violence and harm to their own families to get them here. I can share a quick war story with you, and we'll cut into all your time. But I can remember getting intel reports in Iraq in 04, really 05. We were there in 04 and 05. But that one of the main things that the enemy would do is kidnap a wife and children, yep, hold them hostage, and threaten to murder them if the father didn't go down and park his little white Volkswagen with orange fenders at the Damascus interchange with a cell phone. Yep. Right. Yep. And, I don't know how the news media carried it. I wasn't here then. I was there. But I know what I was hearing from the briefings and stuff that we've gotten. And the vileness of that, because they were sending that man down at threat of the life of his wife and children to detonate him, right, and send their message. That same violence exists in these criminal cartels and these people that are marketing people today. Yep. Yep. They've hit a point of reprobateness, if that's a word, in mind, that they can't recognize right and wrong anymore. And we're going to have to come down really, really hard on those people that are trafficking in human beings, whether it's sex traffic, which is, right, should be a capital crime.
Yep. Absolutely.
Whether it is trafficking to work, it's, I'll say it. I'm not sure that someone trafficking human beings for whatever purpose, that ought not be a capital punishment in the state of Tennessee, even if there's not a loss of life to the victim of the crime. We cannot tolerate that. I think that's one of the things, I said, and I dissented a little bit about the border thing. We're responsible even to treat the those that are coming across that border as human beings, but we're also responsible not to allow those little ones to be abused by other people. And so it is a complex thing, and it's going to take us a while to dig out of this hole.
Yeah. Well, and let me put this in proper context too, because I'm hearing all these stories of just all these military-age men coming across. Okay, I'm not talking about, okay, here's a guy with his family per se. But when we got just lines and lines of military-age men crossing the border, I say light them up. I know that's not going to happen, but that's what I'm talking about. We've got Chinese. We've got people from all over Central and South America. We know we're being invaded. The federal government's leading it. They're not going to stop it. Even if we get Trump back in office by January of 25, that's a long time from now. How many more millions are going to come over here? I mean, I well expect the type of thing that happened in Israel and has happened in this country and other places to happen large scale in this country with all of the people that we've let in. So I'm not feeling too forgiving right now, and I think we have to be proactive. I know we won't, but I think we have to be. So that's really how the context I met that in. But I do want to back up here just a second. I agree with you on especially the sex trafficking, especially if it involves children. Just automatically, as soon as they're convicted, they should be executed. We shouldn't keep people alive like that traffic children. But all this stuff is bleeding over into our country, and I'm just not confident that enough people in our state government are ready to do what needs to be done. Whether you agree with my point of view or not, I'm just not confident that we have enough people up there that are ready to stand up. I hope we do, but it better be soon.
Yeah, and it goes back to the point I was offering just a moment ago. And again, it's not defense of anybody with a counter opinion necessarily, but it's or an attack. Those are weighty things to have to undertake, and to give that order to have that person go into that village and have to search through homes. It was a weighty thing. I've done that, and then when you think about sending hundreds or thousands of men, Tennesseans, they're all going to be volunteers, probably, right? I mean, we're the volunteers,
yeah.
And that will go. It's still a weighty thing. They're away from their families, and those are tough things. And the jobs require tough thinking, right? You know what you're getting into, you should when you get into these things. But part of the reason that we ran that bill again is because the weight of those decisions has to weigh heavy on any human being that's making any attempt to do the right thing. And I do think that we're making some attempts to try to do the right things down there. So hopefully this will help.
Well, every state is now a border state, so I'm all for sending people down there. I just hope that they're not used to do just menial tasks. I hope they're actually going to be put to good use is my hope. And I think that maybe Texas is finally woken up, so hopefully they won't be wasted doing things. I know I had some concern that that's what was happening earlier. But anyway, I want to get to something a little different here. It's somewhat related. It still has to do with government and government abuse. And this is House Bill 694. Prohibits a person, political subdivision, public official in connection with a state emergency from categorizing or proclaiming by order, rule, or regulation that a lawful occupation is non-essential. So I'm sure you can fill in the blanks on the rest of that. So let's talk about that legislation a little bit.
It's just really simple, to be honest with you. It's something we started last year. I think we made lots of mistakes, and this isn't intended to be rearward looking. It is intended to be forward looking, that we can learn from some of the things that we messed up over the past few years. And one of those is we should never declare a person non-essential based on what they do for a living. I just think that's, it's common sense. And this bill, I had it ready to run last spring. We ran into lots of resistance to it, and I'm going to hit resistance on it again this year, but I do plan on carrying it through. It's to me, it's a common sense thing. It's a liberty bill. It's a freedom bill that we can still control a scene from a natural disaster or some bad, some crazy person that's done something hideous. But we shouldn't characterize people by their occupations. There's another way to do that. I just think it smacks of things that we should have learned back in the 50s and 60s. And we allowed ourselves to go down a path of segregating folks here by whether you're a barber or a beautician or you own a bar, you're delivering drinks. Well, I don't drink, but to me, it's a common sense thing. I think lots of people will get behind it. I think there'll be lots of support for this. It's getting it fit in at the right times is my objective for this year, and get it on schedule. These things require a lot of work to get them through, and I have been unsuccessful in cloning myself yet.
Now, is this kind of a standalone bill, or is this going to actually rework the current emergency powers that they gave the governor, which, if you've read them, and I'm sure you have, I don't even see how the original emergency powers legislation that was passed, I think right after 9/11, or maybe even before that, I don't even see how it comports with Article 1 Declaration of Rights in our Tennessee Constitution, because it makes it pretty clear, as I read earlier in Section 1 and Section 2, that, okay, these are rights that are not violated under any pretense. So is this a standalone from that, or is this going to maybe figure in on a rewrite of that whole legislation?
No, this is a standalone. It's my attempt to address that specific part of it. I'm not at all a fan of these emergency powers that were granted. I think probably back in when they were voted in, folks had good intentions, but it's completely blurs that Article 2, Section 1 and 2, about who has the power to do what and who has the authority and responsibility between the different departments. Related, but this bill's focused on
just that aspect.
Essential by their occupation. I think that's immoral.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I think you already touched on this. House Bill 1872, criminal offenses, basically if an illegal alien is convicted of a violent crime or conviction of possession of a firearm, deadly weapon during committing a violent crime, then they get possibility of life imprisonment.
Yeah.
That's House Bill 1872. Anything you need to add to that?
I don't think so. It's deadly weapon. Of course, firearm is a deadly weapon, but there are lots of other deadly weapons. Butcher knife at a ball field is a deadly weapon,
Yep.
and a ball in a kitchen can be a deadly weapon. So we miss that clarification sometimes on things that we do here. That it's easy to just focus on guns and make things anti-gun bills. That is not what this is.
No. Well, if you look over in England where they don't have guns, you got a lot of people killed by knives, and I mean, just left and right. Yeah.
The intent is to address those. There's also a third part of that bill on violence on our campuses, and it'll remain as a part of it too. You're an adult non-student and you go into a campus and commit a violent crime, but there's an enhanced penalty for that as well. And I think that's important. We didn't get that addressed really in all the discussions we had coming up to special session and everything. We talked about lots of other things.
Right.
But it's we're wandering in the wilderness on a couple things, Dave. We've got these young, no experience at anything, no work experience that I know of, that none demonstrated anyways, and little awareness about things that have proclaimed themselves to be experts on things like gun violence. and I've said this, and I've got lots of hate mail for this statement. There's no such thing as gun violence. There is a human violence. There are things like crazy people violence and evil people violence.
Yep.
And we see that, unfortunately, all the time. And it's part of the reason that we're asking the state to go into a time of repentance and prayer, because it is, if we don't deal with the human side of this, we can take every inanimate object that we could possibly name out of the way, and people are still going to hurt one another. Yep. But we focus so much energy on a single item, on firearms. I don't know if it's where these people are just afraid of them or ignorant about them or the operation of the firearm. They're certainly not versed in what the Constitution says, our Tennessee Constitution, or the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights. They haven't read and understand what this Bruin basis is. I, like you, do not think that I need to look to the Supreme Court or any court to be the arbiter of my rights. I can read my Constitution and understand what those are. But and your real defender of your rights is your legislature. That's like job number one. You know, it goes back to our Declaration of Independence. Everybody knows the words of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, but they forget about those next few words that say, and to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the government. And so I think that's very clear with our founders, that the first responsibility of government, any government official, is to secure your rights. That's job one.
Absolutely.
Public safety, prosperity, all these other good things that government should seek to provide are secondary and tertiary to protecting your rights. And, our founders thought our rights were God-given. I agree with them. And I don't need a man or woman arbitrating what my rights are. And it is egregious for someone in my position to decide that I'm going to strip you of your rights because there may be a risk to something.
That's official oppression. I think that's actually in the Tennessee Constitution. I know it's in the code. That's to deliberately do that for somebody in power. That's known as official oppression. You'd have to ask Richard Archie for the actual TCA code. I can't remember the code, but I know that it's in there.
And so you can get into all kinds of discussions about that, about, drunk driving laws and speed limits and all those kinds of things that we collectively come together and decide that it's for the good of society we do those things. But I would remind folks that would ask those questions that those things aren't called out as specifically guaranteed rights.
Right.
And sometimes we put more weight on them. And of course, in the 9th Amendment, the U.S. Constitution, just because it's not mentioned doesn't mean it's not the same God-given right. So there's a real balance. We need to really filter through that. I think overall, most of my colleagues do a pretty good job of that. I am sure I'm going to mess a vote up. I might mess one up before tomorrow's done. But I think one of the things I've been encouraged by is there are a lot of people who want to do the right thing. And sometimes breaking from the norm of the way things have been done is difficult in any organization. And, our founders understood that. God understands that. And I'm not comparing the two. But there has to be, for the Christian, there has to be a renewing of one's mind, because God knows, and we should understand through his knowledge and wisdom, that there's a deterioration in our thought process that we must seek to revive daily by understanding what his will is for our life. So that's high order stuff, right? But then way down below that somewhere is the Constitution and our laws here on this earth are that same kind of thing. And so, I find some encouragement in that there are lots of people that are trying to do the right thing.
Well, I know I want to kind of keep this to an hour because I know you're swamped. You had a busy day. You got a busy day tomorrow. And I know there's still one more bill you want to talk about, your joint resolution on prayer and fasting. Before we get to that, I want to kind of hit something you just said and kind of expand on it a little bit. our state legislatures, you guys are, and you realize this, you're our final line of defense. Okay, well, let me back up. Our Second Amendment's our final line of defense, okay? But ultimately, it will either be 10 or it will be 2. It is much better for everybody if it's 10. And I think only our states, the states are the only entity out there that can peacefully and effectively put our federal government back on the right path. It takes the states to do that, which means we have to stop, in many cases, being complicit with what they're doing. And I know they make that hard with federal dollars. And I read a report last week that we get something like 38% of our state budget from the federal government. We just can't keep going down this path. But the best hope for our country in terms of political aspect and constitutionally, I agree with the divine intervention. We got to have that. We got to have the prayer and repentance. But politically and constitutionally is for the states. That is by far the best option. And I don't know if most of our state legislators recognize the important role they're supposed to play in that equation. But you do, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. I do think that we need a nullification process in place. We are too quick to say, well, we'll lose a federal dollar if we do that. And
Yep.
The truth is, the feds have no dollars. Those are our, and Nashville has no dollars. Those are the citizens of Tennessee's dollars. And,
Right.
We allow that thinking, and it's pervasive. It's everywhere. We do lots of holding up rubber checks and getting our photographs taken to celebrate that we distributed some money somewhere. So that leads me to one I'll mention that you and I hadn't talked about, and it's 2044. So 2044 is, I think, taxation is the first chain of bondage. And so, we're going to collect some taxes to keep getting the roads open and schools open, and, maintain the constitutional authority of government. That's important. But we're carrying a bill that would remove the 4%, the state portion of sales tax, on a specified list of basic food groups. And so, the counties and cities all have taxes on. We did the 90-day tax holiday. I got so much feedback that was a good thing to do and helped so many working families and young families and the elderly with fixed income.
Right.
So we just decided we'd take a shot at removing that 4% period, and we assigned it to the WIC list. Now, not just for WIC recipients, but the WIC list is actually a pretty good tool of basic food groups that the markets already have designated as WIC items. And so to be able to buy bread and eggs and milk and juice and oatmeal and cereal and fresh fruits and vegetables and not pay that 4% portion of the sales tax, I think will help our working families, our young families, and it'll help all Tennesseans. I don't think we should so routinely specify one group or the other that we're going to provide relief to.
Right.
This will provide it to everybody, but the ones that are going to be the most impacted favorably by it are going to be our elderly on fixed income and young families. And I think those $4 that they save on every $100 worth of grocery will go right back into the economy. And they'll buy a new pair of sneakers or medicine or whatever the case may be. And so I'm really happy to carry that. I think this is a consequential piece of legislation. The Democrats have something they're running, a couple are, and it's to reduce. I think it removes all sales tax. I think that we should be aiming to reduce taxes and regulations all the time. I think that should be something that's kind of always present in our periphery, to when we do this. And I think overall, legislators have done pretty good in many of those areas. I think Tennessee's in an enviable spot for the rest of our states, the rest of the state. But I think it needs to be iterative and measured. so that we don't find ourselves in some out of control process that we have so damaged the revenue generation that you have layoffs or suspensions of service and all those kinds of things. And so this bill that we've offered, I'm confident won't do that. And so it'll go to, I've got a committee meeting on it tomorrow, so I'm excited about that one. I think it's a good thing to do. And I think every time that we cannot send a tax dollar to a central government, it's a good thing.
I agree. Is there, other than SJR 803, or is there any other bills you want to talk about?
Don't think so. Probably many, but I won't take your time with them. The resolution 803 is simply, I'll read you a couple things if you're okay with it.
Sure, absolutely.
And this is really, this, I really feel like the Lord just kind of laid this on our heart to do this. It's tremendously important. And I won't read through the whole thing because it's a lengthy, but I'll start with this. Our Congress, back when they were Continental Congress, and then after, 1781 and on up, we would call, congressional members would call us to times of prayer and fasting, seeking God's favor. And even after that, when we had presidents, I'll give you an example. John Adams, on April 15, 1799, he says, and this is the wording of that time period, right? He says, "This day be observed throughout the United States of America as a day of solemn humiliation, fasting, and prayer, that the citizens on that day abstain as far as may be from their secular occupation and devote time to sacred duties of religion, in public and in private, that they call to mind our numerous offenses against the Most High God, confess them before Him with the sincerest penitence, imploring His pardon for mercy through the great Mediator and Redeemer for our past transgressions." And it goes on. I won't read the rest of that. But we're told, and this is in the resolution, it says, "We hold that except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain." And that's from Psalms. And so the resolution is basically this. And it says, "Be it further resolved that we recognize that God, as creator and king of all glory, has both the authority to judge and to bless the nations and states. Be it further resolved that we, as public servants in the Tennessee General Assembly, seek God's mercy upon our land and beseech Him not to withdraw His hand of blessing from us. Be it further resolved that we recognize our sins and shortcomings before Him and humbly ask His forgiveness. Be it further resolved that we ask the Lord Jesus to heal our land and remove the violence, the human trafficking, the addiction, and corruption. And be it resolved that we ask the Holy Spirit to fill the halls of our government, our classrooms, our places of business, our churches, and our homes with peace, love, and joy. And that we call upon those who are physically able and spiritually inclined to do so, to join in a 30-day season of prayer and intermittent fasting as we begin a new fiscal year as a means of seeking God's blessing and humbling ourselves to receive His grace and His mercy, transforming our lives, our communities, our state, and our nation." And I think that I might get the privilege to stand in front of this great body about lots of things. I'll never stand in front of this body with anything even more important than this. I'm absolutely convinced with everything that's in my heart that it is a time for this. And so I was so pleased last week, and I don't believe in jinx at all. And I think that's superstitious, and I'm not a superstitious person. But in the first committee, we got the votes to get it through, and so I've got another committee meeting tomorrow before we go to the floor. I think one of those things I would encourage you with, because sometimes it does seem like all is lost. And the enemy wants to do that. The one true enemy. Again, I'm going to go back to the preachy bit for just a minute, okay?
Okay.
The enemy wants you to make you feel like you're all alone. that nobody's standing beside you. And he'll do things like, maybe get a few votes against you so that you don't get a bill passed, or he'll make you look at the news, and he'll be standing on your shoulder, if you will, the little caricature. And you'll be screaming in your ear, see, it's all going to pieces. And there's no hope. This is never going to get back. It's hopeless. All these silly people have done all these things. And he wants to isolate you. He did that to some of the greatest of great men. He did that to Elijah after Mount Carmel. Elijah became so depressed after he had defeated the Baal prophets and outran Ahab and Jezebel's chariot back to Jezreel. Within a couple of days, he's basically asked the Lord to take his life. And so the enemy does that. That is an eternal spiritual, or not an eternal, but a spiritual battle that we fight until eternity comes and he's defeated. And that applies here on this life. And so I'd offer this as an encouragement, because I know your heart is in freedom and America and liberty, as is mine. We have kindred spirits there. There is hope. And I think that the good Lord's calling men like you to speak the truth on radio shows. And he's calling women like the young lady in the office next to me here to work long hours to make sure that the constituents are served. And he's calling on school teachers to do the right things. And he's calling on governors and local state representatives to just stand in the gap. So let's stand. Let's not admit defeat. Let's recognize the perilous path that we're on, but let's charge straight ahead. Let's be like David when he went down to check on his three older brothers. His dad Jesse sent him down into the valley of Elah to check on them. David shows up, young pre-teenager. He hears this giant Goliath coming out. I'm a literalist, so I believe this actually happened. The Bible says it, so I believe it. And he hears him screaming obscene things at God's army. And he says these words. He says, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And his brothers made fun of him, his three older brothers, who each day would get up and put their battle array on and then go back into the foxhole and hide because they were scared of the giant. And they made fun of him. They were the first ones to attack David. They attacked him before Goliath did. But the Bible tells us that Goliath ran toward, that David ran toward Goliath. And I'm no David. I am just a dumb country boy from Rockwood, Tennessee. But I'll tell you, Dave, let's charge that enemy that's trying to take our freedom. Let's confront him with a righteous confidence that America and the foundation of her can't be uprooted by some of the silliness that's going on today. That we're gonna pass on to our next generation the one past it, liberty, and as such pass on prosperity. So I'm convinced we can. I get tired at the end of the day. I was telling you before we started, I got up about 5 o'clock this morning, got a little after 5 maybe, got up to the office and started readying for bill presentations. Long days. I think I shared with you last time I visited, I don't want to be a politician forever. I never had any desire to do this.
Right.
But let's us men that love this country, let's get our hearts right, and let's take it back. And I think we can do that without any bad thing having to happen if we'll fully trust in that God Almighty that John Adams trusted in. And
Well, I know we can't do it without him. I don't have any illusions about that. And not quitting, don't have anywhere to go. And so I just, I get disgusted and discouraged, but I don't really ever think of quitting. And I hope that other people out there don't quit, because you got nowhere to go. And it will only get worse if we quit. It won't get better. It's not like, what's the old saying, that you may not have interest in politics, but it has an interest in you. You will be made to care. So, that still all applies on steroids in this day and age.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Dave, I think it was probably no different in the 60s. I think it's probably no different in the 50s.
I don't think they were not quite as warped as our society is now. I've read about that era, and it was probably a bigger shock to that generation, the World War II generations whose kids were doing all these things, it was probably a bigger shock. But as far as the level of depravity, I think we've really exceeded that, and the threat from our own government, I think, is exceeded by the things that were happening at that time. That's just my opinion, but.
And not being argumentative, I agree. The depravity thing is what was shunned then is celebrated today, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But there's a great level of depravity that would do what they did at Tuskegee with those men there.
Yeah. And, true.
And that's. We maybe did it on a larger scale with COVID, but it's the same kind of evil that does those kinds of things. It's been prevalent forever. And we'll get an opportunity to be light or darkness. Let's be light and let's overtake this.
Well, thank you for being with us. Thank you for all you do. I'll give you the last word.
Nothing. I've talked too much, probably. I appreciate you having me on the show, and I appreciate the fact that you're willing to get out and speak and put your time into this thing. It's important, and we'll look back. You and I'll probably be forgotten within 2 or 3 years of now, and that's okay. Let's make a contribution that our kids and grandkids can live free. So I appreciate you doing that.
Well, hey, thanks for coming on, and thank you for all you do, and God bless you.
Thank you, Dan.
I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch the program. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell to stay informed about our upcoming shows. As a reminder, you can now listen to us on podcast at Spreaker.com. You can find all the audio-only podcasts of your favorite episodes on our website, The Tennessee Informer, or do a search on The Tennessee Informer on Spreaker.com, where you can also download the Spreaker app for Android or Apple phones. We're excited to announce the Tennessee Informer podcasts are now available to listen to on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, and several other platforms. Take a moment to check out and follow us on Facebook at TN Informer. We'll be posting news and information about upcoming shows there, as well as on our website, tninformer.com. And you can also sign up for a weekly newsletter there. We're on Twitter now as well at twitter.com/tninformer. Share us with your friends so they can stay informed on what's going on in our state. Our guests next week will be Tess Robbins and Terry Nicholson from the GOP SEC, which is the GOP SEC. The SEC is the State Executive Committee. We'll do a little legislative update, and then we'll talk about some things going on in the SEC. Hope you'll join us. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.